All right.
It's been a little while. We're not talking about Disclosure Day.
Disclosure what? What are you talking? What's that?
I missed the broadcast. I did not watch the news that day, actually. So, now we got a little busy with stuff and took a little break, and we're coming back. Not talking about Disclosure Day, but we're talking about Pasolini, Pier, Paolo Pasolini, and his whole career, sort of, right?
Yeah, kind of just our thoughts on him, the films we've seen by him, things like that.
We already talked about Theorem. We have an episode about that. One of his 60s films. And we both have now watched Salò, his final film. But you went back and watched all of them? Did you watch all of them?
Close to all of them. I think Canterbury Tales I didn't catch, and a couple other things. His documentaries or shorts, not all those. But yeah, I think every feature besides Canterbury Tales,
Wow.
Put on the queue. And yeah, after I saw, I thought to myself, I'll give one other film of his a chance. I can't remember if it was Medea or something like that. And, it still has that kind of quality of his filmmaking. And there was just something about it that I was like, I really find it enchanting. So I had to watch the rest.
Yeah, this was kind of you started doing that, and I said, well, let's do like an episode. Let's talk some more about him, since you're getting more fascinated again with his career.
And also Salò is in the year, or was in the year we could have talked about it in 76, and we were like not wanting to devote an episode just to that movie because it's talked about and known, so infamous, and so it's like, okay, instead of that, let's just talk about his other films, his other filmography, and who he was and all that. Yeah,
and look, you might want to go to the film historians for your opinions and facts and information about the life of Pier Paolo Pasolini, but some like it unauthorized. And I am Jay Brooks Young.
And I'm Zach Jones.
I had not really heard of Pasolini before these last couple of years when I started getting into, the old art films and stuff. So it's hard for me to wrap my head around like his stature in Italy and stuff. He was a celebrity in his day, I think we both listened to this film comment podcast episode they did on him with the director Ranu Jude and this critic Giovanni Marchini Camia. But that critic Camia, he compared the fascination and the speculation about Pasolini's death to JFK in the U.S. Like, that was their JFK at the time, it felt like, when he was abducted and murdered, kind of after the release of Salò. Or actually, don't know now. Did it come out before he died even? I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, it was right at that same... It was right coinciding with what was going to be the release of Salò. He was traveling and killed beforehand. So
yeah, and it was something that just went unexplained for a long time, similar to JFK, where people just talked about it, and it was this point of fascination because. Right, he had a column in Italy's widest circulated newspaper. He was a director making all these films. He was a public intellectual out talking about issues and commenting on the topics of the day. He was very, very well known in Italy, and
and he was incredibly prolific and hardworking. He would write in his journal or talk about how he didn't know how he had time himself to do all the things that he was signing up to do. Like Just the number of publications he would write for, scripts that he was writing. I think at one point he was writing like 10 scripts or like helping with 10 different scripts at the same time, on top of all the other things he was doing. So he was everywhere. He was always involved. That was after that was also after he would clear some of the legal allegations that he was constantly going through as well. I think it was something like 30 or 40 different legal accusations for just the work that he created, just creatively. People were constantly trying to censor him or claim that he had pornographic or inflammatory writing or film and stuff like that. So yeah, he was popular, but he was also
controversial.
Unbelievably controversial. Yeah, unbelievably controversial. I was trying to think of a person who he would be, who would today we would say is a similarity to him, and I was struggling to find an example.
Well, yeah, it doesn't feel like we have artists today that are that politically active and outspoken. It feels like almost everyone in this country stays away from politics most of the time, and maybe they'll pick their battles here and there, but for someone that prominent to be, speaking out constantly and making provocative art on top of that was certainly something that we're not really familiar with, I don't think.
No, especially to that scale. Maybe on a lesser degree. Somebody like Ari Aster with his last movie that had criticisms of the left in it is on a small scale something similar to who he was, because he was somebody who was on the left, but was also always pissing off his own group all the time too. Constantly criticizing the Communist Party he was part of, criticizing the bourgeoisie, the left, and all that. This is why I also was like very interested in him. I'm very fascinated by people who can do both their own thing somehow and gain popularity. To me, that's like an amazing kind of anomaly in a way. There's not a lot of people who can withstand criticism from pretty much all sides because they're truly doing their own thing, and they're not willing to just go along with any one group for the sake of avoiding hate from them in a way. Like they're keeping their own principles true to themselves, and they're speaking from, to the best of their ability, their own belief, regardless of the group's changing beliefs. And yet remains popular the whole time too. Do you know what I mean? It's like a lot of people will say the wrong thing and then they'll just be outcast and forgotten in some sense. But he just kept gaining popularity no matter what he did, and no matter how much criticism or hate he got. People would still come out to his movies in huge numbers and read his books, his poetry, and cared about what he had to say.
Yeah. I mean, he comes kind of after Italian neorealism has been established post-World War II.
Yeah.
And it's hard to gauge the popularity or how relevant, these filmmakers or these films were, but it feels like, they were doing something that was provoking, the public and kind of pushing the censors and talking about kind of hot button things. And that was mostly about the economic conditions immediately after the war. When you think about Bicycle Thieves and the De Sica films or Fellini's stuff, showing the lives of prostitutes and circus performers and people on the edge of society. But he kind of comes along, and he starts working in films, doing some writing for Fellini, right? Adapting some of that Roman dialect that that he was familiar with from spending time with some of those people. But like
Fellini likely read his novels, which all sparked backlash as well, and were all the similar style, and all wrote about the oppressed and the kind of people he would feature, like pimps and prostitutes and stuff like that. So Fellini likely read his novels and was intrigued by his the people that he wrote about and how he wrote about them. And then he started writing scripts for other people. So he was, and I don't know how that all happened exactly, but yeah, some people in the Italian cinema world were interested in having him do that, and so they paid him to help out on scripts mostly. So then by that point, Fellini was like, "Who's this young kid?" Not super young at the time, but younger.
No, adult, like probably around the same age as Fellini, right? But he had been Fellini been making films for like probably a decade or something, and Pasolini had been writing in that time. But yeah, those guys like Fellini, they try to get the best, and if that's the guy who seems to be capturing authentically like what's going on with the people literally living on the streets, let me get that guy to help me write my films.
Yeah, I don't know Fellini's background, but Pasolini loved his mother dearly. He was obsessed with her, possibly the only person he actually truly loved, and he hated his dad. And so his mom was from like a small town in Italy that still had a dialect and like an almost indigenous Italian culture, whereas his father was part of the military and was much more modern and rigid. And that created in him, through his poetry and through his writings, this voice for cultures that had been created over time and had a uniqueness about them that was tethered to the land, to ancestry. And what he saw was after World War II, especially once the Germans came and locked down Italy, he was in the university at that time. And I think what he witnessed was this homogenization, this modernizing Italy that was slowly encroaching on and erasing this culture that he had become so fond of and loved dearly. And so his whole life, that's what he's trying to do, is preserve this group of people who the more wealthy, modern group of people would look down on and consider lower, and key to all of his work too, consider not sacred, which is interesting. But what he was always getting called out for was like from the very first book and very first movie that he made, he would have this epic kind of Christian orchestrated music over top of like a pimp in a small town. Sort of saying like this man is just as sacred, if not more sacred, than that which we typically deem to be sacred, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I find that fascinating across his films that I've seen, kind of drawing those distinctions between the more rural, the more like proletariat or sub-proletariat, and then the like petty bourgeois, and always drawing attention to how hollow those bourgeois lives and like customs and everything, how hollow all of that is.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of theorem, like, is that sort of thing. But like, I don't know, even Salò feels like it's speaking to, these people embracing the invaders, right? The German Nazi occupiers during World War II. Here are these Italians who are going to embrace them because they don't care about their country or their culture or anything. They just want some proximity to power, and they're here is the depravity of what a human being can become if you don't care about some kind of culture, tradition, something that has lasted for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't get on the scale that we saw with the World Wars. It's kind of incomprehensible to ever think that you could get that depravity on that scale with cultures that are both diverse and, interconnected amongst themselves in such a way where it's like everybody knows each other and everyone has these universal understandings with each other on a grassroots level. You just don't get World War II from that, because with World War II you need to parcel and separate everybody. No one has names any longer; they have numbers, and there's no texture to it, and definitely no community at all. It's completely erased by the government and the fascism. So he saw that. I mean, and that's the thing. Pasolini, then he lived through this German oversight while he was at the university. And in the university, that was the only place that the German soldiers and overseers didn't censor so much what people would say. Like, so during the 2 years or however long that Germany was invading Italy, they would censor everything that was written. So if even the universities, if they published something, that would be read by somebody and for any potential protesting or whatever. But at the university in person, the students could say whatever they wanted to. And Pasolini even had like certain professors that were able to fly the students out to places like Paris to see films being shown that would not even close, not be able to be shown in Italy remotely close. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
Rossellini's films and stuff like that. But you saw Jean Renoir and other films during that time. And you can just imagine that dichotomy of this kind of fascist overrule, and yet he himself is going and talking about art and philosophy. He even started like a small school group for people, and they would walk miles to come be a part of his like a small school, basically. Yeah, during that time.
Was the school for like adults or like people not going to university?
Yeah, I would guess teens, middle school to high school aged, I would assume. Some had been shut down, and so he kind of started one, and he started a magazine that he would publish to the greatest limit he could, whatever he could. You know what I mean? Anything pressing up against censorship. Possibly even like, just not even caring about that and just passing it out to people. But that, I think, got him a little footing in the university world, and he made connections there with authors and professors and stuff that gave him that chance to become a little bit well known during that time, where he would like pass his novels that he was writing to different professors, and they were like, "You really got something good here. You should keep working on it." But sadly, what happened was he got into some sort of lawsuit, some sort of legal thing where someone claimed he had a gun in a bar or something like that. And that set him back. And all these legal troubles would always constantly set him back. So, because otherwise he would have maybe been right up there with Fellini already. Had he not had these lawsuits against him. There was another lawsuit where he encroached on a young man of some kind, I think. And, it's well known that he was chasing after younger men, sometimes below the age of consent in Italy, but no lawsuit he ever had would ever go completely to guilty. He was always deemed innocent in the end, but it still set him back. It still tarnished his reputation for a while. So again, if that hadn't happened, he would have been a Fellini at the same time there was Fellini. But instead, he was always struggling, always writing as much as he could, doing anything he possibly could to get work, and that's what holds him back from making his first film in 1960.
I know, and you watch that now, his first film, Accattone, and it doesn't seem that controversial or anything. It's certainly not like a Salò, if your idea of Pasolini is just he's the guy that made Salò, but it was pretty controversial at the time, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, the controversy again is that he isn't just showing the lifestyle of a pimp, which had other people had done, or like Rocco and his brothers, for example. I forget when that came out, but that of course shows some harrowing scenes. But it's not controversial because it's what Pasolini does is he has this intense kind of communistic slant, sort of, poetry of the people, you could say. Like he only cares about these cultures that have existed forever and look like they're being erased. Like that's what he ultimately cares about. And he almost cares about it to a degree where he doesn't even see the people. He almost just sees the myth of them. This is some problem with him that people have criticized. He was a loving guy and he was a really caring person, but you almost got the sense that he didn't really care too much about individuals. That he could really easily, if you had like one argument with him, he could move on from your friendship with a drop of a hat. So that's a problem, but that's also like what creates a director in some sense, like this guy who's able to oversee and kind of see the larger picture constantly. But Accattone, it shows at Venice Festival. So like his very first film, this is an indication of his kind of standing in the film world and just in general, his popularity is that his very first feature is shown at one of the largest film festivals. And yeah, it's received with mostly applause at that showing. But then once it starts to show in Italy and across other nations, it is criticized. It's looked at as being controversial because he's showing a pimp as someone who is special and even sacred and important. And that's going to challenge the bourgeoisie, who they themselves want to feel like, no, I'm important. We're important. We uphold, the values of society. We're closer to, sacredness, if there is anything like that.
Right. It's like you're glorifying this lifestyle, and it's never that simple, but they get so challenged by just a little bit of kind of ambiguity of humanity even shown to a character who is doing bad things.
Yeah. And constantly getting himself in trouble, abusing others around him. He's not a good guy. And I almost think you should play the song. I think, is it Bach or Beethoven? You should almost play that opening track and the song that he recurs throughout Accattone, and we'll reuse in other films too, just for people to imagine and to remember what that is like to hear that grand music. It's so grand. I listened back, and it's almost so grand. It's almost like you'd hear it in a church, but you'd hear it like beyond the church. Even it's so grand. It's like it's grander than any music that's ever been made to some degree, and which is that's not a hotly debatable thing. That's who those musicians were. But yeah, so that's why it's controversial. Then he goes on. Well, yeah. So you watched Accattone. What did you think of it? Did you have to, to some degree, place yourself in that historical context to kind of imagine how controversial it could have been?
A little bit, but even just watching it, like I did appreciate him showing this very flawed character and just focusing in on that, not sanitizing it or not condoning even necessarily that character. Considering that comes out right at the start of the 60s, it did feel unique in that way. We have, some of those earlier Fellini films and stuff that we can compare it to where they focus on these compromised characters, but that was still pretty new, pretty uncommon, and it certainly, I would think that this film was an influence on Scorsese and some of the people around the world, that later on in the 60s and 70s were telling stories about these kind of compromised, morally ambiguous characters. There's a lot of like complexity there. So I did really appreciate it. Around that time, I think I watched one of the early Antonioni films too, one of the ones that he does before La Ventura, and that one kind of left me much quicker than Accattone did. Like Accattone is pretty terrific, especially for a debut feature.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it's fantastic. And then I would say Mama Roma, you would almost want to consider that second film he does to be like connected to Accattone, almost a part two. It's very much the same kind of style, but that plays at I have to say that plays at Venice too. Like the next year he comes out with another movie, and that also opens at Venice. And that one's controversial, okay, because they show Accattone, and there's a famous actress. I don't remember her name. She was in Rossellini's films. Her name Anna Magnani.
Yeah, Mangiani, maybe.
There it is. Yeah. Anna Mangiani. Yeah. And so she's at that festival, and she had already become well known, and she saw this movie by Pasolini. She sees Accattone, and she goes, I want to be a part of whatever film he makes next, or I want to be a part of I want to be in one of his films. And so he kind of writes a screenplay for her in a way after that. Yeah. And casts her in it. And that becomes controversial just because of some of the way she's portrayed, and it's different than her typical persona, and it's not as like endearing, I would say. And it just continues on and on. The controversy. Just nothing he would do that wasn't controversial. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll remind people, because I always find this fascinating, that on Accattone, Bernardo Bertolucci works as the assistant director to Pasolini.
Right.
He was like 20 years old or something, but I think his father knew Pasolini possibly. But certainly his early stuff feels very influenced by Pasolini. I especially think The Conformist, when you talk about Pasolini's experience at school during the war, I feel like, The Conformist was probably partly inspired by hearing those stories from Pasolini about what was going on during the war. That's a film literally about a guy going from Italy, traveling to France to meet with an old professor. I just find that connection interesting. And then also, his cinematographer, he plucks this guy, Tonino Dellicoli, who I don't think was doing anything special up to that point. I think he had just shot this Italian Thief of Baghdad film before he does Accattone, but he becomes Pasolini's like go-to cinematographer for just about all of his films. And by the time that they're making The Gospel According to Matthew, he gets hired by Leone to shoot The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, which is an incredible looking film. But he then shoots a couple Leone films and some other stuff. He becomes a really big deal after Matthew, I think. But they were working together from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, he works with him up until Salò, so he pretty much is his guy. Yeah. And such a unique style. Pasolini gives him the direction of doing a lot of handhelds. You'll even have handheld wide shots. Often, the style that he employs, that Pasolini must be continuing to tell him to do, even after he makes films like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, is to make it feel documentary. Like a handheld wide isn't this kind of tracking shot that's smooth that you would see in a larger production typically. It's this kind of, it's almost like we're on location, we're on the scene. And yet it's being shot in a historical myth or historical time. And yeah, it gives that feeling, I guess, of like you're actually there with these people who lived hundreds of, eras ago. But, so it's interesting that Pasolini didn't have him adapt to a different style you know, he had him preserve the original style, and every one of his films kind of looks the same because of that.
Yeah, that kind of documentary feeling, almost like French New Wave. Maybe I wonder if there was a little bit of influence taken from French New Wave, but he wrote at some point about how film could be most poetic if it captured some kind of subjective feeling of the characters, and somehow he connected that documentary style, that feeling of someone holding the camera, you know, to feeling the emotionality of the character in the scene.
Yeah, it's hard to know what inspiration he had from the French New Wave guys. I'm sure he had some, but if anything, it's just giving filmmakers the creative freedom, or the sense of creative freedom that they can do it. At the very least, like, oh, you can make a film like this? Okay, give me some money then, and I'll do the same. Which by the way, famously Fellini gives him money for Accattone, and then Fellini sees the initial shots that he gets, and after seeing these first shots from Accattone, Fellini is like, I hate this, and he takes his name off of the whole project.
Wow.
which causes Pasolini to have to then look for a new producer, and I think he finds that guy Alfredo Bini, is that his name, who ends up producing most of his films up until like the trilogy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this was a guy who was like really wealthy. I can't remember what he did or how he got a lot of money, but he was also a guy who like loved weird art and younger artists who were doing weird things, and so he sort of got lucky to become a friend of his, who then would just pay for whatever he dreamt up. So then he does Accattone and Mama Roma, right? Now, what's kind of interesting is, though there was controversy in various parts of Italy towards what he was doing, there's some church or some Catholic organization, I don't remember exactly what it was, who actually saw what he was doing as good. They appreciated it. They were like, no, this makes sense. This is what Jesus would have done. You know, Jesus would have said these people who are lower are sacred. And so they actually loved it. And they were like, we'll help you out with a film that you do. And that's where the Gospel of Matthew comes into fruition, is like sort of with the help and the aid and direction of this like kind of Catholic association of some kind. Yeah, the gospel was controversial. Again, all of these things are controversial, but they're not entirely controversial. There's always going to be groups of people who were excited and interested by it. Again, another film that he does that's shown at Venice. And I think when Gospel came out, I think that one was controversial, more controversial prior to it being shown. With his first two movies shown at Venice, there was controversy after. Here, now he's become much more well-known because of his films. And people were kind of upset that this guy was now going to do a recreation of the biblical story of Jesus. And people kind of thought that there was going to be protests and there's going to be backlash. They thought there was going to be backlash. So they were prepared for it. It's one of those stories that's more so what's remembered is that, you know, when these movies come out and then in the news, people are like, oh, you know, there's higher security in theaters because this movie's coming out. And then it comes out and it's like, oh, wait, nothing happened. It's not that big of a deal. I think that that's something like what the gospel, that movie was. That movie created more drama before it was shown, essentially. And then after it was shown, it wasn't like people were like, oh, this is actually pretty good. Like it tells
it was
how it was. Yeah.
Rapturous reception, I think, when it came out.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we wouldn't have the context for that now. But, you know, all the anticipation and people, you know, wondering what's he going to do with this one, kind of leading up to it.
And that was the first movie you saw by Pasolini, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and you appreciated it.
Yeah, I saw it in a weird context. I showed up to a 35 millimeter screening not knowing it was the English dub. And it's a pretty poorly done dub. It was not like a great print either on top of that. So I was taken out of the film, I would say, but it's fascinating for sure. And it's fun just as an exercise of like thinking about what Jesus would have been like, you know, in comparison to how he is used as a symbol by modern churches. But like it feels like he's evoking the inherent communism of Jesus's speaking, his teachings, you know. But it didn't set off any warning bells in the heads of Christians at the time. They loved this film. They thought it was really powerful. And it was more so, you know, some people on the left who felt like he was being too favorable towards Christianity with the film. But I feel like that was a minority. You know, I think most people were like, this is really cool because you're taking a very grand story that we all know, but you're treating it with this kind of realism and making it very interesting to think about. So that like puts him on the map in a new way, right?
Yeah, it does. I will say that like part of the controversy too was that like there were some Christians who thought that even though it was good, that it was made by a guy who a previous thing he did was like he had like I don't know, it was something that he did. It was a shorter thing where it was an image of a cross, and it was definitely like it was blasphemous. Yeah. I think it was the one with, I could get that, I might be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure it was when he cast Citizen Kane or Orson Welles as a director, and he's directing this scene with a cross, and
because he does blasphemous. That like anthology film, Rogopaji, where Godard does a segment, and he does a segment, and two other directors. Pasolini does a segment. I read about that. I totally forgot.
Yeah.
About that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where he just. So it's at the point now that where he has had so much controversy that even if he did something good, the thing that still ticks people off is that here's a controversial man making something that's good. It's still, his name's too tarnished for a certain number of people.
Oh, I just thought of a comparison.
Yeah.
Kanye West.
Yeah. Huh? Yeah, I know. That is the best example, even though there's obvious differences, but that's the best example in terms of somebody who is extremely controversial and yet will do a show, in a huge theater, sold out, and it is like one of the most intricately designed sets that has ever been done. Like, he's able to get employ tons of people to design an insane set, sell it out after controversy that would have teared anybody else down. Anyone else that would have said anything close to what he has said would have just destroyed their career, and yet somehow he's thriving.
Kanye and Pasolini, I think, have both been, like, people have questioned whether the things they say are for the sake of the controversy, for the sake of, drumming up attention,
Yeah. Well, so then so in terms of that, Pasolini will do movies. I mean, even the gospel, people will make this association with, in the sense that here he's making a movie about one of the most famous person who was killed at a stake for spreading information that the state didn't want people to know about. He was basically, Jesus was basically somebody who the state hated and killed because they viewed who he was and what he represented as dangerous. he wasn't violent. It wasn't like he was leading a rebel army. But what his thoughts were and what his beliefs were apparently deemed dangerous enough to kill. And, so Pasolini, you have to imagine that he's probably relating himself to that story to a degree. He's been hated. He's been sent to court. He's been tried, and it's almost like I know, you gotta know, and he writes this in his journal and stuff too. Like he views himself as a kind of saint for the people that has constantly been hated and trying to be brought down. And he views himself as invincible to a degree, And then, so yeah, Kanye, Jesus, Pasolini, they're all similar. They're all similar in that way. They all have very different contexts, of course, but they're all similar in that they stick to their own individual principle to the best of their ability. I mean, obviously, Jesus probably got some of what he said from various people. John the Baptist, of course, was probably preaching something that he was interested in. Traders and travelers from different cultures, he probably got some insight from. But to the best of their ability, they stayed true to like what their own vision was, that their own principles were, and they had an intuition that was there to stick to that against any group at all. Like literally any group. They just did not give in. They stayed to their own path somehow. Yeah, just despite being thrown.
Yeah, to whatever degree he felt like he was.
Well, he definitely did. He did write things like that for sure. He wrote it publicly sometimes in poems and in his journal. Yeah, he did feel like especially by the end, he felt like he was misunderstood and hated, and yet how he viewed the world was, there's a righteousness to it for sure.
That's interesting to grapple with. You think about him, you think about someone like Jean-Luc Godard, and it's tough to square appreciating the fact that they're outspoken, the fact that they will push the boundaries of art or discourse or whatever, and square that with them maybe having these inflated egos, like holding on to antiquated ideas or just ideas that feel wrong to us. You might not want to like have this person on your side all the time, or like point to them and tell people you should be like them or you should listen to every single thing they say. But what we find is that these people are important, in history and in a culture that they're in, because they get people to think outside of what the thing they're supposed to conform to is, whatever direction culture is going in. Like, they introduce some diversity of thought into the landscape, and we need that. I think that's just what it comes down to, is we need people like that. And they're the person that like gets in their head that they need to speak out to this extent. There's something a little wrong maybe in there, but it's a net good, it seems, that they are at least speaking out against the status quo. Yeah,
exactly. And again, he makes films about myths, and it's almost like he himself had become a myth, kind of a legend in his own lifetime, just like Kanye. I mean, these are people who, in other words, take on, by being so true to themselves and by somehow not losing popularity, they, somewhere along the line, they also take on a different, it's like I say myth, I say that because it's like who they are, whoever they are, is now within this incredibly larger thing. And of course, all celebrities, that happens to them. However, the difference is most celebrities, if they said something wrong or were caught having done something wrong now or 20 years ago, could be brought down in an instant, and that has happened. We've seen that happen throughout history. These particular celebrities are unique in that they can do something wrong, and it just adds to their image. It's so weird that they are, again, whoever they really are is now way smaller than this image that they have of themselves, which is out of their, here's the thing, it's almost out of their control. So we can't even do anything about it. Whether we want to say like, oh, I don't think this guy's worth any time then. Like if he was this way, even if it was a net negative, there's nothing you can do. It's become a story. It's become a myth. It's taken on its own life of its own beyond even the person themselves, it seems. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Another way to put that is if Kanye went and, I mean, he sort of did. He tried to go to Jackson. He went to, what's it called? Jackson Hole. And I remember he was trying to make a community with these like weird dome-shaped architecture. And it's like, even doing that, people were like, what are you doing? It's like he could go live in, Antarctica in some base underground by himself, and people would be like, what is he doing now? It's like he can't do anything now. The whole Kanye, whatever that stuff is, it's its own life. And I actually feel for the individual in that sense, that they are now trapped inside of a machine that is controlling them, and they have zero individuality now, which is ironic that these people who are the most individualistic, seemingly, among all celebrities, begin to lose their own individuality at some point.
Well, yeah, I have to imagine that made Pasolini want to, write these columns in the newspaper and stuff, like continue to try to get his word out in his own word, like speak for himself, when so many people are giving their opinions on him, and the image of him is so totally separated from the guy walking around. So he's still trying to like counteract that through his career. I mean, I wonder if when you get to that point, you just become kind of disconnected from the real world, and the stuff that you do or say kind of has less of an effect, or like it's less effective because it doesn't speak to people's real lives. Like it feels like Kanye got more rich and kind of disconnected, and now he just tries to like maintain his sort of myth through these controversial provocations that he makes, but like it doesn't feel like there's something that he's speaking to behind it.
That's true.
Or like Godard by the end of the 60s, I think, feeling that kind of like image making and the machinery around him, decides to just stop making commercial films, and he starts making little independent stuff about what's going on in the world politically. But he kind of steps back. He says, like, this, you can't win at this. Like this becomes kind of self-defeating if you're trying to continue to make something that the whole world is supposed to engage with. And I what do you think about that in terms of what Pasolini goes on to make after he is this sort of very well-known guy as a filmmaker?
Mm-hmm. Well, he then does this trilogy of movies that are more sexual. They often show the cultural aspects of these well-known stories that he was deeply interested in, like Arabian Nights or Decameron, which is like, just that older Italy, older time, but he makes it very playful and he makes it very sexual, but in a way that's poetic and mythological. And then I told you this, but yeah, he immediately after these films were released, like Decameron and and Arabian Nights, other Italian filmmakers made their own versions that were basically like sex comedies. They were like, it was just like pure entertainment. And the more that happened, and the more people like criticized him for having sexuality in his films, and yet these guys would just come around and immediately make like an entertaining, purely entertaining form in the same way. He gets more and more pissed by that, to the point where after he made those 3 films, he was like, he wasn't upset that he made them, but he separates himself from them. He kind of says like, whatever that was, I'm moving on. He is sort of upset that he made those movies, not to the point where he wishes they weren't made, but to the point where he's like, almost wishes he could probably take his name off of them. He doesn't like what they ended up representing and ended up becoming for people. And it's what inspires him to make Salò. And there is this, one of the last things he said in like a interview of some kind with somebody about Salò was he did say he thought that scandal was a responsibility. And he thought that if you weren't scandalizing, then you weren't being like a real artist. So he thought that scandal was vital to being a filmmaker, to being an artist and an author and all that. And yet at the same time, like you were saying about Kanye, is it the case that Kanye is just scandal now? Like, is Kanye actually producing works of art that contribute to the historical and deeply complex artistry that has come before us? Or is he just creating scandals still? You know what I mean? Like, it's almost like if those guys who followed him in this trilogy created pure entertainment, then Kanye is just creating pure scandal. But with Pasolini, he was scandalizing in order to wake people up, I think. And then he had this deep mythological and literary knowledge. He was extremely smart, and his movies are full of depth in that way. So he's still scandalizing people, but with the ground of understanding for politics and art and all of that stuff. So Salò, as scandalizing as it is, and hard to watch as it can be, it's full of deeply insightful political ideas and all that kind of thing.
Well, I might push back a little bit on how deep or insightful those thoughts are.
Please do, yeah.
You know, when you decide you're going to make a film that is just unbound by good taste, you know, and there'll be people eating shit and having sex with minors and raping people and all this stuff, wantonly killing and hurting people, that becomes the thing, you know. And it's a statement, but the statement is about like how far we're willing to let art or film go. It really, even if he had gone into this with the thought of like, this is a story, I've got these really concrete characters that I want to talk about in mind, whatever, all that kind of like fades to the background because of the content, because of that controversial stuff. And so whatever he intended, it's hard to feel like the point of the film is anything but the provocation. And I think when that provocation is so important to the film, it kind of flattens any metaphor or anything that it says about politics or human behavior or whatever. Like, it feels like fascism can spiral out to complete and utter depravity. It's like, that's pretty simple, and it's hard to feel like there's more to it than that, you know? So when I watched this, I don't know, I don't feel like I got much more from it besides this is provocative, you know? But I'm curious how you found it when you watched it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in terms of how one would view, if let's say somebody had never seen any Pasolini films at all, and then this is for whatever reason the first one they see, I can definitely, it would make a lot of sense to say that the flatness of it could potentially only threaten one's ability to kind of, engage with the larger meaning of it, because it doesn't have a story. There's no hope in it. It's nihilistic, essentially. And without that context, just taking it on its own face value, it can lead most people to feel, what was that? Why did I even watch that? But I think, like, with some art, and I know the art world gets really insane with this type of thing sometimes, but there are going to be cases where something's made in a context, and that context might be highbrow. It might be relating back to the art world or your own, experience within the art world. And so sometimes you do have to have that context for that type of thing. And we listened to that one podcast about with Radu Jude. He made the joke that, like, well, how many people that Pasolini was, like, standing up for actually saw his movies? Like, how much of the proletariat, is that the word?
Yeah.
How many of them actually went to see his movies? Probably not that many. But that's not who it's for. It's not for them. He loves them. He goes and finds some of them to actually be in his movies, right? Like in Accattone, the guy who plays the pimp is actually a pimp, and so he loved them. But this is to challenge the bourgeoisie. It's to challenge the art world. The context, I think, is that he felt like no one understood him, and he also felt like this modern world, like we had said before in the top of this podcast, that the modern world has gotten itself to a point where this kind of thing could happen. And you could read about it. You could watch a documentary on it. You could explore, you can explore it in various ways. And one other way to kind of shine a light on it is to do a blunt, non-narrative driven, in your face, controversial film about it. And who knows if that works, but the idea is, like, try it out, be free, see if it does work. I think that it probably worked for some people. I think John Waters was a fan of it. I think Lars von Trier, various other directors, and those directors are making movies that do the same kind of thing, where people come away from some of those movies and go, like, what the hell was that? Gaspar Noé, he was a huge fan of it, and now he makes movies that do the same thing for people. They walk away and they say, that felt like flat nihilism. Yeah, but okay, so then the thought is, art is meant to challenge. And so sometimes art is created in such a way where you walk away with the question about whether that was thought-provoking or whether it was what your question was. I'm trying to remember specifically what you said, but did it stir the soul in some way? Like, and I think in some sense a movie like this, in being so extreme in that way, it does provoke one to at least ask, why didn't this work? And in asking why didn't this work, this is a kind of film when you ask that question, you find interesting new questions. There's some films and some art that's created where you go, why didn't that work? Oh, that didn't work because it just wasn't good. It was shit. It didn't provide any new questions, move on from it. And it gets lost to history, you forget about it, you move on. I think this is the kind of film when you ask, why doesn't this work? You end up with new questions. And that's why I think it's thought-provoking, ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I find it most interesting in the context of his whole career.
Yeah.
And the fact that when you make a film like this is attached to everything that you ever made, these things, they live in the context, like, together now, no one can watch Gospel of Matthew and not know this is the guy that made the shit-eating movie as well. And it is interesting that, like, he was willing to sort of put that blemish on his career. Like, it just kind of further shows how the point of this was to fight against the status quo, to stay, provocative and all this stuff more we've talked about. But, like, it's tougher as time goes on, as we have less knowledge about who this is. We don't hear his name or learn about him outside of, like, really cinephile circles. So it's tough for most people, I would imagine, to approach that film and understand, the context of it. Someone had to make this, and it mattered because despite their stature as a filmmaker, they wanted to make this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I find most interesting. And it's part of why it doesn't work is also just it's been 50 years now, and we have had all those filmmakers that were inspired by this go and make more stuff. That French Extremities stuff, I've watched at least a couple films from that genre, that movement, and they're really rough. They ratchet it up quite a bit more than Salò does, and they really hit you with some hard stuff to watch. And like in the internet and growing up in internet culture now, there are people that want to continue to provoke and make stuff like the Human Centipede and the Serbian film and
right.
Two Girls, One Cup, and spread this stuff around and inflict it on other people. And for all of us that kind of have now grown up in that culture, it's not as unique to come across something like Salò. Whereas back then, right, like, this is a produced film and it's got this content in it and whatever, like, that was a much more unique thing. Though by that time in the 70s, we were getting pretty hairy with what people were making in films. That film The Night Porter, which is about a Holocaust survivor getting into a relationship with a former Nazi. Like, there was a lot of stuff evoking Nazis in films at this time, provoking people. Like, he was not the only one kind of reaching for controversial stuff, certainly. And sometimes it can feel like when people talk about Salò, they're like, there's nothing like this from the time. But that had become its own sort of subsection of people bringing stuff to film festivals, was like, how controversial can I be, But no, I mean, I appreciate it. Like, Rossellini didn't make this film. Like, Fellini didn't make this film. It says something that Pasolini was the guy who wanted to sort of deconstruct, what is the good taste? What are we willing to put in film when this stuff exists, when this culture has some accent of fascism in it, and we know where that fascism can lead, So maybe we should continue to engage with that. But
and it wasn't going to be, it's on its own in some sense. This was also the first of a trilogy that was going to deal with and portray even more. He was going to do 2 more films similar to Salò after this. He had written one. I totally forget. I'm blanking on what that one was now, and it's a mystery what the third would have been. But that was his plan, to do 2 more. So whatever it was, he was apparently in the new phase of making 3 movies within a theme of whatever theme he was on at the time. But yeah, he, as is famously known, he eventually was probably killed by people, and that doesn't seem like a far-fetched thing given who he was. And the day he was killed, it was rainy. So the thing is that a thing I read about, it's hard to get through some of the details of it on a more detailed level. It's just so, to me, I find that type of thing really difficult to get through. But I guess what happened was they found more tracks and more feet print, but then they weren't able to get very good clear pictures, or clear evidence of it because the rain that night had washed a lot of it away. But essentially it seemed like there was multiple people involved in this killing pretty early on. And then this case would reopen several times through several decades. That made it seem like this one guy, I think his last name was Pelosi, wasn't the only killer. And eventually, I think Pelosi did go to prison. And then eventually, 30 years later, I think in the late 90s or 2000s or something, he came out and he said, enough time has now gone by where I can come out and say that I was definitely put up to this by a group of guys.
Mm.
And I'm guaranteed most of those guys are gone or dead by now. So I feel safe finally to say that. That's still, coming from the accused murderer. So you can't take that with full credibility, but it definitely seems like we're not the jurors here, so you can make your own assumption. But it seems like all said and done that likely he was killed by a group of people who didn't like him and probably hated him forever. But
ran afoul of this organized crime group.
Mm-hmm.
That's the idea, right?
Yeah. But, and I also think, so because he was murdered, and this is something that's been said before about various individuals, whether it's MLK or even JFK and all these guys, there's been a thought I've seen where no person would want to take such an extreme path of individuality any longer because of the threat of being killed. Like these guys were all killed around the same time in the 70s and stuff, and it's almost like that's a huge warning sign to anybody who comes after wanting to be leading or being controversial in some sense. Like, if you're controversial, be careful because you could be killed, essentially. So Kanye, it's interesting because he is so controversial, but I don't know if is there any threat of him being assassinated? I don't think that. Maybe there was a bit when he was doing the Nazi stuff.
I would have to think there's some, yeah.
Yeah. But there's not, if you know what I mean. It was like there were so many people at this time in the 70s, 60s, and 70s who were controversial and had a lot of popularity, and then they ended up being killed. And you suddenly see, like, after that time, not as many like crazy popular individuals who are like, if they come up against a threat, they'll probably cool down a bit, I feel like.
I wonder if anyone's written about this. Like, it feels like now our political violence, it's pointed towards the crowd, the public. Like, these people who might be prompted to go assassinate politicians or celebrities are more likely to just go into a public place and start firing on strangers.
Yeah,
and I wonder if there's something there of I don't know.
It's true, though. Now that you say that too, I am now thinking of Charlie Kirk, of course, and then the attempted assassination of Trump. So maybe we'll see a resurgence or something like that. I don't know, but I know. I mean, that's not totally true. The author, there's an author who. He wrote the Satanic Verses. Salman Rushdie. It was an assassination attempt against him. So yeah, there's still plenty of. I guess there's still plenty of that going on, and it's always gonna happen. It's always gonna continue.
I know. There's a larger conversation of like, are we stuck in this world that hasn't changed very much since World War II? Like.
Right.
Is there like a pressure building up? I don't know.
Yeah, that is a larger conversation, but I will say I think we all get that. We all understand that sentiment that like we're sort of living in a post 1960s world where everything radically changed in the 60s, culture changed, flipped upside down. And yeah, not a lot of movement in that way since that time. But I think part of why I was fascinated by Pasolini is that he feels like a person who, although he may be associated with Italian cinema, maybe he's associated a little bit with New Wave, he's someone that is a little bit different from even that. He's different from all those guys, and his other movies, feel like they are a connection to a time before the change. So it's fun to see a kind of vision of what the world may have felt like to a degree prior to the changing times that we've now been in since then, like you say. Because you could ask the question, we haven't changed much since the 60s, and is the answer to that question because there is nothing more? There could only be two things. There could either be grassroots culture that's techno-pessimistic. Like you could go to an Amish community and you would step into the past, a time that hadn't changed. Those guys haven't changed since 1850. So you could either say that there's either culture on a grassroots level, or there is nothing more. Like we don't know if there's another evolutionary step to get to. Like can we make the world even more modern? Do you know what I mean? Like what's going to be the next new kind of revolution that modernizes everything and brings it up to another kind of civilizational level? Is that even possible? And if we did it, who's to say how long that would take and all that? It might. It's simply the case that it might not actually be possible. That we might have reached some limit in modernity for various reasons, and one of those reasons might just be that people don't actually want it. It's not something that's, once you achieve it, the thing that you had desired. It was like an enticing carrot at the end of a stick, but once you get it, you're like, oh wait, this actually isn't as good as the carrots I was already eating back in the day. And so Pasolini's this person who I think kind of saw that, and he wanted to, and he shares it in interesting various ways of like, no, what's more important is the dialect. What's more important is the small town community that is super well knit and super, super textural and grounded and earthy and full of a life that is incomprehensible to a person who had never seen that before. You can travel the world to these various cultures that still exist, and it's like that. You're like, what? What is this place, and who are these people? It feels so real. It feels so lively, and so, yeah. I guess that larger conversation just happened, for me at least, and
well, yeah. You have to wonder, what about our empathy? What about our ability to empathize with the other, with the people that we don't know, the people that are different from us?
Yeah.
Is there a limit on it that keeps us from making that better world? When we're now all connected globally, are we able to come together and turn this world into something that works for the majority instead of our, capitalist ruling class? Or does our empathy just on a biological level not extend far enough to do that? It's an open question.
Right.
We don't know.
No, that's a good point. I'm not, one couldn't think to reverse things and go back to a past would work well, because yeah, for sure there were many other problems, but yeah, I guess if there was a next step, I think it would. I think that it would be something like taking what worked from the past and merging it with what works now. And one example I have of that, which is a strange example, is when I was in Norway. I stayed on a kind of a farmstead that these people had, and that farmstead was like partially funded by the Norwegian government. And it was like, because it was like they were raising a kind of sheep that were like a variety of sheep that was kind of rare. It was like a heirloom variety of sheep. And so it was kind of seeing how the structure that we've created that has money involved and all that stuff, it's simply the case that it's misguided and misdirected in a bunch of certain ways where politicians get wealthier and wealthier and the whole thing. And yeah, you could imagine in some sense all that would really need to be happening here is that this enormous amount of wealth that we've accrued in this crazy system that we've built simply needs to be directed towards well-being, towards what is sustainable, towards everybody, and shared in a way that's makes more sense. Yeah, there's your answer. And then the question is like, how the hell do you get people on board, and how do we force politicians to make that happen? So who knows?
Who knows? One more thing. Did you read Kyle Faulkner's Letterboxd review of Salò?
No.
We're both fans of Kyle Faulkner's Letterboxd accounts.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've mentioned it before, but he's a fascinating writer. But he talks about
and director too.
I haven't gotten to see his work yet, but I just like to read his stuff. He talks about reading the Marquis de Sade novel, 120 Days of Sodom, and feeling like that is a work that is ultimately not meant to be read, that it's too painful. It takes something away from you to read that.
Mm-hmm.
But he connects, Sade to Kafka and ultimately to Pasolini, but that, these people that in their day are questioned, are they okay mentally? Is there something wrong with them? Like, what does it say about a person that they're capable of, writing stuff like this or making films like this? But that it all kind of comes back to this fight against the state, this fight against, the status of society and stuff, that this is a world that creates the kind of conditions that they deal with in their works. This is a very interesting review that people should read. Salò.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
It's weird that it's on the Criterion Collection, so people, get their Blu-ray and they post it on social media and stuff, and it's like this meme of cinephilia. It feels like it kind of reduces what the film is a little bit, that it has that status online.
Yeah, even a comment that Faulkner wrote to somebody, I think in response to another comment, was something like, this is just a fraction of the internal processing that he had so even though it's a long, well, actually, by Faulkner standards, it's not super long, but even though it's kind of long as a review, he points out that it's not even close to the amount of thoughts that he had churning after watching it. And I think, that I would agree with, and I'm looking forward to reading what he has to say. He has a fascinating way of connecting things and tying things together.
Really does. Well, no, this was fun to talk about Pasolini on the whole. Do a different kind of episode.
Yeah, which we'll do more of these at some point. But this was a fun one. This was a fun first one to do,
Yeah, we'll be back to talking about a regular, just one movie next week. Because it's going to be Sara Gomez, One Way or Another, the Cuban film, the posthumous film. Gomez died very young, and some of her colleagues at the Cuban Film Institute finished the editing on this and put it out in 1977, I think. But we'll be talking about Cuban film next week.
I feel good about that. There's always so much you could say. Of course, if you're going to we do films, and there's always lots to say. And so talking about an individual, one filmmaker. But he was a crazy guy. Go and listen to Theorem, the podcast we did on Theorem. And then, you stay tuned and see you next time.
Yeah, unauthorizedpod.com for anything else. All right, bye-bye.
Peace.
Peace.